Hey, welcome to the first layer. My name's Richard, and you know that guy over there,
Just call me
that way.
Sleepy Joe.
Yeah, Sleepy
How's
Joe.
it going, guys?
It's me and Brian tonight. We are here with you together again, the dynamic duo, talking about 3D printing and answering your questions on Ask for Help. That's what this show's for. Now, this week, Brian, we didn't
Yes.
get a whole lot of mail.
I'm hoping that's because your printers are all working great. Because mine sure
Either
wasn't,
that,
but
it's either that or people just think we're full of BS.
oh, maybe. Maybe.
Could be.
Give us a thumbs up in the chat
If you think we're full of BS.
yeah, exactly.
So we'll get to the question in just a minute. There's a few people in the chat that have been hanging around for quite some time that we got to say hi to. Trevor Rickard, of course, Jerry Knapp from 3D Printing and Painting, him and his lovely wife. Steve Rio, I hope I said that right. DePark88, Gary T, Rex Waldy, Hobby Howie FPV, David Harmon, David Sell, and Joseph Jolly. Good evening, everybody. Joseph's down in Florida. We're up here in cold Canada. I see we're both wearing hoodies tonight.
Yeah, it was cold. We didn't get the I'm going to translate for our American friends here. We didn't get the 8 inches predicted of snow, but we did get about 2 inches, at least down in the south. I've had to drive at least 80 miles today back and forth between some airport runs, and
Wow.
it peaked out at I think about 20 degrees Fahrenheit. So it was about -10 for the daily high today. It was not a fun day here in Canada.
No, it wasn't. Did you go out on those roads at 8 o'clock this morning like I did?
I didn't go out at 8, but I did go out just midday after all the blowing snow ended there. And there were, actually, you know what? Good on people. They learned how to drive this time. It only takes till the last snowfall of the year for people to remember how to drive.
Well, coming from up here in the north part of Calgary down to the south where I had to go today, there was a pucker factor between um, what is that, Memorial and 17th. There was a real pucker factor. I'd say it was about a 7.
Yeah,
And for anybody
it's that
that
time of
doesn't
year.
understand what a pucker factor is, I'm not going to tell you. All right, let's. We got a few others that joined in. We got Robert Marvin all the way from Southern California. Jerry's teasing us. He says T-shirt and short weather there in Vegas. So yeah,
Oh. See, I made the
Martens.
mistake of shaving off the sides, if you guys haven't noticed. So I made the mistake of doing that, and then, of course, it snows. Every
Well,
time.
you know, you're trying to look like the old man, I think.
Yes, yes. Look into
Hey, we
the
got John Kitchen in
future.
the house.
Oh, wait, wait. Oh, there we go.
Yeah, there's RT, Richard Taylor, and 14
Yeah.
Scarecrow. Hello from Indianapolis, he says. Well, hello to Indianapolis. All right, so let's get down to what is Ask for Help. Ask for Help is a show where you get to submit your questions during the week and to our questions at thefirstlayer.com. And I'm just going to pull up that one really quickly because I'm on the wrong mouse.
It's going to be one of those weeks. If you guys can't
Oh,
tell,
yeah.
Richard just woke me up.
Yeah, yeah. All right, so if you want to get your questions into the show, you can do so by going to questions or sending your questions to questions at thefirstlayer.com. Those are the questions that we take from for the show. Yes, you can ask questions in the chat as well, but our priority are the ones that come in through email first, and then we try and get to everybody else. And we try and do it as best we can. So it's right there on the screen. Other way, there you go, right there on the screen. Check it out. Go and submit your questions. We do answer questions from time to time from Facebook, but don't get a lot on Twitter, so it's kind of weird that way. But this
That's Twitter
is
for you.
yeah, this is TFL Live, and this is what we do every Saturday night. Tonight, I am not drinking any libations because I know a few people are going to wonder. I am just drinking just water with lemon and just a tad of sugar in it because I don't like regular lemon water. It just, ugh, I need
Yeah.
just a touch
Yeah.
of sweetness. All right, so let's get to this question because it's kind of weird, and I don't know how to answer it. So maybe we can do it together. This is from Murano Diaz, and Murano says, "Hi, I was given a DaVinci 1.0 my first 3D printer and can't get it heating. The hot end or the bed have changed the MOSFET and nothing. I have a 12 volt in one of the hot end thermistor or terminals. If I check it against ground, but not against the other hot end terminal. All plugs seem to be right. The printer comes with Repetier 0.92 installed and everything works okay except for the hot ends. It seems that the chip is not turning the heater on. Can you please tell me what I'm doing wrong? Mariano, I don't think you're doing anything wrong. That sounds like a mechanical issue on the board, so it's something I would take and get checked out if you can. What do you say about that, Brian?
Yeah, I'm going to suggest it's probably a failure of your power MOSFET. Basically, if everyone talks about MOSFETs and transistors, and I don't think anyone's given an adequate description, because when I went to school for electronics, even they didn't always give a black and white description. It wasn't until I think it was called like Electronics Fundamentals. It was some weird book I found at Chapters up here in Canada. They described the functionality. So what you need to know is a MOSFET, when used in the world of 3D printing, is used in place of a relay, which is a device that allows a smaller amount of power to switch on and off a higher amount of power. And the reason they use a MOSFET instead of a relay is because with a MOSFET, it's all digital, it's all internal. And so when you're dealing with this power regulation, you're turning on and off that switch hundreds of times, sometimes per second, and that would wear through a physical relay. So MOSFETs are these tiny little all-in-one, and you might have heard the term solid-state relay. A solid-state relay is just a couple of MOSFETs in there. So it's a digital switch that does high switching. Now, they do fail sometimes, whether it's a result of heat or a defect. They can fail in both the open and the closed position, which is the worst case scenario. So if you're finding that you can't get power, break down the test points on your board, I say. So you check your power supply, and if that's good, you check the contacts on your printer bed. Now, if your board powers on, you're probably good through that link. Next, check the two contacts for the heater out. And the best way to do that is to set your temperature to something like 200 degrees and then check it right away, because by default it goes to a 100% on signal. We're not going to talk about signal analysis. It's probably going to show your 12 or 24 volts. If you're seeing nothing at that stage, your heater is never going to heat up. You've got a bad MOSFET. Now, unless you have a good local electronics workshop that can resolder it, it does mean you're going to have to replace your main board. So that's why we always advise to try and have an external MOSFET on your printers. That way, if that MOSFET fails, it's easy enough to replace that $10 module than it is a $30 or $40 board.
There you go.
There's your education lesson, and I just saw the viewership go.
Oh, Brian and his long-winded
This is why
answers.
you don't talk to me right after a nap.
Yeah, there you go. We just let him ramble on. And he's drinking some sort of energy drink tonight, too.
Yes. Okay, this is not sponsored by them. I wish it was. This is the X-Thermo line of energy drinks that will probably be banned sooner or later due to its child-friendly flavors and packaging, even though it's not meant for children.
There you go. Hey, there's a couple people that just showed up here in the chat tonight. There's a Red One, or Red Light 34. I finally got that.
Yeah, how's it going?
How many times? I don't know. I just finally got that. There's Ben Stanley. Hello to you, sir. We've got Rovers in the house. We haven't seen him in a while. I want to say a special hello to Captain Lachlan. Now, I'll tell you why I want to say a special hello to Captain Lachlan. This young man is probably one of the most enthusiastic young men that has come into Spool 3D and sat down and talked to me about 3D printing.
I'm just gonna put that up there.
For what?
Thanks, Richard. I thought I was the enthusiastic one.
Well, you are, but you're my right hand, Lachlan. You know,
okay.
one of these days, I'm going to talk to Lachlan and his dad, and I'm going to have them in the studio. Why am I holding a pair of scissors? I'm going to have them in the studio so that we can record an episode with Lachlan. I'd really like to because he's a great kid. He knows a lot about 3D printing. He's very enthusiastic about it. And I think he's only maybe 13 or 14 years old. Lachlan, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you're right in that 13, 14 a year old area. And I got to tell you, man, he's got more energy than you and me put together.
I remember back when I was that age, I was working with 3ds Max 5 in high school, and we were doing these weird IK chain stuff, and we were looking at that saying, how cool was that? That we could, people from 2 years ago couldn't do that. So, I wish 3D printing was around when I was in high school to play around with that stuff.
Me too. Hey, we've got a few more that kind of showed up. There's Nicholas. There's Jeff Collins. And there we go. Oh, I'm wrong. Lachlan's between 11 and 12.
Oh, wow.
So there he is. Between 11. I
Even
think he's
better.
going on 12.
Even
But
better.
he's a great kid, and I want to have him in the studio and do an episode with him. All right.
That's great.
Stop
So
dribbling
we
on
have a couple of questions. So Lachlan actually opened up with a great question tonight.
Okay.
What is the best type of support?
Wow. What's the best type of support? It's going to depend on what you're making. If you went back and watched the episode that we did on Cura supports a few weeks ago, if not, go and check that one out because it's going to give you a lot of great information, Lachlan. Now, for me, I just use straight zigzag supports when I'm doing stuff that's not complicated like figures or things like that. For figures, I'm using tree supports in Cura, and I think they work absolutely amazing. What about you?
Yeah, I do like tree supports. I do acknowledge that tree supports do have their caveats, notably with large flat surfaces where you need to build a large baseline of supports. I have been playing with some new experimental items in Cura 4.5 that I'd love to share with you guys as soon as actually I got a big print downstairs that's 5 days worth that's using some of these features. And they've actually started to warm me back up to not using tree supports and going back to conventional supports. So watch for that shortly, and I'll share the results with you guys. I will agree with Richard that with a huge asterisk there, tree supports are great. Now,
Yeah, they're
tree
really
supports are incredibly computationally demanding. So I know lots of people that their computers have been crashing outright because the tree support calculation is so intense. And then if you don't understand all the parameters of tree supports, it can try and print some real funky angles. It does get up there eventually, and actually in some cases, especially when you use larger nozzles such as a 0.8 like I'm using, the tree supports are very demanding on filament usage, and sometimes it will calculate, sure, you'll get supports in every little area that could have been bridged, but I had pieces that I dropped my supports from 2,200 grams of filament, which is like 2.2 kilos, down to almost below 1 just by changing up my support schemas. So that's my caveat. If you're doing small stuff with lots of details and lots of overhangs, tree supports are bloody amazing.
Yeah.
But you have to be patient, make sure all your layouts and everything are in the right order because you could be slicing that file for 20 minutes sometimes.
Yep. Trevor's got a great question here. He says, I have a quick question for y'all. When I 3D print a Banshee with windows on the top end, they are so thin and looked messy. They look like they messed up. Can you just tap them and break them? Besides that, everything else looks fine.
So he's saying,
fine.
so he's printing a Banshee and it's got windows and
Okay.
And at the top end they're very thin and look messed up. So now I haven't played much with this because in general I scale things up, and if my windows look thin, I might consider going the route of my resin printer. But there's a setting in Cura, and Richard, maybe you can tell me if you played with it, about for single extrusion wall settings.
No, excuse me.
Oh, he's
Something
dying
went
over
down the
here.
wrong hole. Sorry about that.
Sorry, let's see.
No, I have not played with that yet, but I am going to be because we're still continuing this series on Cura. We're going to dive into a little bit more in the more advanced features of it as we move forward. So you definitely want to keep up on that. Keep watching that playlist. Keep watching the channel for that. But no, I haven't. So I think thin wall extrusion is something to definitely take a look at.
Maybe it's simplified 3D because I'm not seeing in my Cura settings right now.
Okay.
But simply put, you can't expect a 3D printer to magically print any model out there. And I do have a few examples on my computer here that we were going to talk about a little bit later in the program. I've actually acquired a rather large old archive of 3D models, and many of which were used for TV productions back in the day. They're not designed for 3D printing, and so they've got single faces that otherwise have no mass. So when you go into the slicer and cut it up, you'll see parts are missing, and that's just simply because the walls are so thin that the nozzle could never print it. And these are the settings I'm talking about these single wall extrusions, where if I recall, and I think it was in Simplify 3D, it goes and default creates a wall as thick as your nozzle on those walls that would not otherwise never print.
I think that you're right about that.
So simply put, it sounds like your model is not desirable for your nozzle size. I would look into seeing if you can maybe thicken up just a little bit in a suite like Blender or any other modeling suite, or maybe even get in touch with the original author if their intention was to make it 3D printable. Find out if, mention it to them and see if they can correct their model. Because it is a community after all.
That's right. Jeff Collins has a question here. He says, have you guys done a video on updating the firmware on the Cr-10S Pro? No. Why? Because it just came out and there's no real reason to update the firmware on the Cr-10S Pro at this time. I'm going to wait and see what Creality does if they come out with a firmware update for it. But it's still very new, so I don't think there's really anything that you really need to do with it, unless you're adding something else. But the ones that we sell at Spool 3D, they already come with a BL Touch, so everything's there. It's all ready to go.
Yeah, and there are a couple other channels out there that have already covered that upgrade. Truth be told, Richard and I, neither of us actually have that machine, and there hasn't been.
I'm still rocking my Cr-10S in the background.
Yeah, I've got a couple of them right behind me here. They're still working great. So the 10S Pro, there are a couple videos out there on it. I believe TH3D did one on installing their unified firmware and doing the LCD updates. Just honestly, we don't have one in hand to play around with it, but it is supported in Marlin. I can't imagine the steps are going to be very different over a Cr-10S.
There you go. Got a question for the first layer. This is coming from Ben Stanley. I'm looking at getting the Anycubic Photon Zero resin printer for high detail parts. What safety precautions should I take when printing with UV resin? I just happen to have some of that stuff behind me because I just kicked the mic stand. Did you hear that?
That's how you get resin everywhere, and that's how you get chemical burns.
There's my Duplicator 7 in the background. So first and foremost, you want to get yourself some of these. Grease monkeys. Well, you don't want a grease monkey, but, well, maybe you do. I don't know. These are 5mm nitrile gloves that are disposable. I really like using these. They fit my hands really well. There's not a lot of powder in them. Actually, they're powder-free. They have a rolled cuff on them, and they work really well. And I get these from Princess Auto here in Canada. You probably get a similar brand down in the States, I'm sure, from... I was going to say Bunnings, but that's over in Australia. The other thing you're going to want is some of this stuff, alcohol.
Which may be a little bit tough to get right now, what with the panic purchasing out there.
And you're also going to want to get yourself a really good resin. Now, we're not sponsored by Monocular, but I use their resins and I really like it. Safety precautions, just make sure that when you are using resin printers, you don't want to get resin or raw resin onto your skin and leave it there. If you do happen to get some, clean it off right away. Take a little bit of alcohol, clean up your hands. That way it won't cause a chemical burn, because unfortunately resins can cause chemical burns. And if you get a chemical burn, it hurts a lot more than a regular burn, and it hurts a lot longer. So wear gloves. Do you need to wear a mask? It all depends on what resin you're using. I find that the Monocular is a lot lower odor than, say, the Wanhao resin or the stock Anycubic, the stock Anycubic resin. They both stink really bad. The Monocular is not so bad. There's some other resins out there now that have low to no odor, so check those out. If you have breathing problems, or anybody in your home has breathing problems, you want to make sure that your resin printer is out of harm's way, so to speak, so that people won't be coughing and getting asthma attacks and things like that. So resins can, what's that? Yes, and keep it away from pets, because resin can cause that kind of problem. Now, we have got coming to us from the fine folks over at Banggood. They sent us a what is it? An LD002R.
LD002R, yeah.
Yeah, that's the new resin printer from Creality. We're going to be doing a review on that very, very soon. Probably we'll be recording it this coming Saturday, a week from today. So I would definitely check that out. It's coming in right around the same price tag as the Zero and the Elegoo Mars and all of the lower cost ones, but it goes down to like 25 microns. They're saying 20 to 25 microns. So very fine resolution, and it uses Qi2 box, which a lot of these guys are using. So that's something to think about.
All this competition now, honestly. This is great. I was just thinking, it was what, 8 months ago that the Anycubic Photon was going for $7.99 Canadian?
Yeah, exactly.
It's quite wild.
Yeah, so safety glasses, gloves, isopropyl alcohol, stuff that you need for cleanup, that'll definitely work.
Now, I got a question for my American friends, because we've had debates about this up here. So my resin printer right now is currently located in the kitchen, and it's within light from exterior windows. And we haven't had any problems with it, even if you get a little splash on your hand, because all of the windows in Canada are UV. They have UV built into the glass, UV filtering. Right. So my question for the American friends is, does your window glass have the same thing, or do you know? Because that could impact where you can keep these machines. The cover only protects it when the cover's on. And even that, if you put that out in direct sunlight, some UV will still get through. Yeah. And the fact is, for at least all the burns I've seen, the chemical burns were a result of heat, which is generated when that cures. So it's a result of UV exposure of the resin on their hands, not the resin itself coming in contact. Because I have bad habits. I'm not, I'm sometimes in a rush. I don't put the gloves on. I don't do the right thing. And I get a little bit of resin on my hands. So I've been fine. Now, that's by no means a testimonial that it's safe, but I just want to see with you guys, are your windows UV filtered, your light bulbs and all that? Because I don't have UV bleed light in my house.
Yeah, there you go. There's a couple of other questions here that I just want to hit really quick. First, Captain Lachlan says his biggest print was 21 hours. Thumbs up to you, my friend.
Awesome.
You'll get into longer prints. Trust me.
Sausage is asking, what's the best migration strategy to fix stringing?
Retraction, speed, and heat. And make sure that your filament doesn't have a lot of moisture in it.
And as I've learned lately, and this is my secret tip of the week, is turn off Z-Hop in Cura. I don't know what is wrong with Z-Hop right now, but if I turn on Z-Hop, I get stringing everywhere.
Really?
If I turn it off, all my lines will come out clean. And this is with no change on my retraction, no change, like no linear advance, no jerk settings tweaking. It's at least significantly reduced, and it's something to do with how Cura processes the G code for the lift versus with no lift. I don't know, and there's no coasting on. Before you guys ask, I think I'll give a shout out to, I think it was Shep. I saw it on his channel. Um, I've been playing around with that, and I just changed that one setting. And that was it. So if you are having major stringing issues, that's an easy one to quickly try.
Here we've got a question from Suffering from Thickness. I like that. Suffering from Thickness.
Welcome to the club.
I installed an SKR E3 dip on my Ender 5. When I auto home, the hot end carriage bumps into the very end and corners of the axis and makes a grinding noise. Yes, it will. And Brian and I both worked on an Ender 5 a few months ago where we really had to go in and change how the firmware looks at the space that it can print in. Because of where everything is, it kind of does things backwards, and it goes out of the lines. It colors out of the lines.
Yeah, there's a bunch of settings you can play with in there. I actually haven't had too much of a grinding issue, but if you are, I would first take a look at your end stops. And what I usually do, just to check and make sure everything can move freely, because things do change when you wiggle around your machine, is once you've freshly powered up your printer and your steppers are disabled, if they're not disabled, go into your motion menu, and at the bottom there is disable steppers. Take your hot end and move it to the end stops yourself by hand, and just see if it can naturally hit the switch, because if it's grinding, that means it hasn't detected the end stop. It could be a bad wiring connection. It could be that your little metal arm is just bent in slightly the wrong way, and it's not hitting it properly. It sounds very much like a mechanical thing. Software-wise, the E3 dip, I've got it running right from my Ender 5 up to my Cr-10S5, and the end stops have not given me any headaches. That being said, it's always good to check the wires because, as I've been discussing with Richard and many people this week, a bunch of issues arose with my machines that were a result of not only the original wires, but the Creality extension kit. Yeah. So check your wires always. In fact, fun story. My 10S5, at one point, it was trying to home and it was just hammering into the Y-axis end stop, and I couldn't figure out why. I checked I checked the wires visually and they looked good. I pressed the switch, it looked good. I moved the bed back and heard it click. I said, everything's fine. And then I went over and I bumped the cable, and what I found was quite literally the end stop cable. One of them was purely held on via pressure between its own wire and the connector. And so when I bumped it the wrong way, it was slightly separated. So just go and give those little wires a wiggle and make sure you still have a solid connection.
Jafter Dark says, how experienced with the new Octoprint issues? How's the experience with the new Octoprint issues? I had my printer up and running for a full day, working pretty well. Printed one thing with Octoprint, woke up, screen was all messed up, 2 stepper drivers. I haven't tried the new Octoprint. I have an older version of Octoprint that I've run on Raspberry Pis quite successfully. Again, I'm not a huge fan of that kind of stuff, and anybody who knows me knows that I know my machines well enough, and I know that they are tuned and all the safety features are turned on. So I'm not really worried about it. I'll start a print on a Friday and I'll come in on a Monday, and either it's messed up or it isn't.
So Octoprint, I can tell you right now, your screen all messed up is not a result of Octoprint. It sounds like there's something wrong in the firmware there. So if you ever get a corrupt screen, notably on pretty much any of the old Meltzy boards, like your Ender 3 default board, and sometimes even the Cr-10 S boards, the Creality 2 point, whatever they're up to, 2.2 or whatever now. If the board has a memory leak, if the firmware version that's on there has a memory leak, it starts to dribble code into the area that handles how the screen is drawn. And depending on how much it leaks and causes issues, it may also leak into the stepper area there. So Octoprint, here's how you can tell what's going on. If Octoprint is giving you issues, Notably, you would see a lot of stutters in your print, and that's because your serial buffer in between Octoprint and your main board has filled up, and you're just trying to pipe through too much information. And we'll talk about that a little bit down the road here. But Octoprint will never cause issues within the firmware of your machine. Octoprint is similar. I'm just trying to think of an adequate thing. It's almost like a remote control, right? So if you've got a drone that you're flying out there with your remote control, if an Octoprint's having the issue, it's equivalent to, say, your battery's dying in your control. Now, what your drone, while it's doing up there, what it does when it loses communication with that is dependent on how the firmware is programmed. So in an ideal world, it'll stop moving and it'll hang there and wait for further instruction. And in the case of a drone, it does that until a battery dies. Your printer is not on a battery, so it's going to simply stop going until it receives further instructions. Now, to add one more layer of complexity to that to make it more annoying is that the way the firmwares are programmed on your 8-bit boards, anytime you plug in a USB cable, it initiates a reset of the processor. And so you might think, oh, something's wrong there. But what's probably happened, what almost 98% of the issues I've encountered with users are, is you have a bad USB cable, and just the wrong little bit of motion on the table caused that USB cable to unplug or wiggle loose and connect again just long enough for the processor to say, oh, that's a new connection, I need to restart. Your print fails, you come back, your printer's cooled down, it's sitting on the home screen, and it's floating in the exact same position where it froze. So you think, Octoprint must have told my printer to stop. So that's just something, a little kind of breakdown of how that interaction works. Octoprint is just another way of commanding your printer remotely, similar to a program like Pronterface or even using Cura's print. It's just that if you print from SD card, you're removing another component from the failure point. So I know I bored Richard enough to get rid of me there. So.
No, I actually had to go get something because we're at the halfway point of our live stream tonight, and I want to remind you guys that we've got some things that we're doing now a little bit differently. One of the things that we've gone back to is Patreon, and I want to quickly talk about that. Patreon goes into helping us produce more content for you guys. It helps us to do different projects, helps us to get out to events like an upcoming Maker Fair that's going to be happening here in Calgary. There's no date on it yet, but I did get an email about it, and we're going to talk about more of that as it comes closer. Now, one of the projects you guys might have seen me kind of floating around is this guy. And this is a half-scale R2-D2 from Mr. Baddeley's 3D printed droids. I do have his files, so I'm going to do a half-scale one for an event that we're going to be doing as part of the show. And this has got, of course, filler all over it right now. Thanks to my wife, who does all of the dirty work for me, and I just have to come along and paint it. We are building this thing. It will be fairly large. It will be about a half a meter tall when it's done. And if you want to see that project, the only way to get to see that project is by becoming a Patreon, because that's the only place you're going to see the progress photos, the final finished ones, and maybe a little bit of video, special video that you're going to see. You're also going to see behind-the-scenes photos, behind-the-scenes stuff that we've got planned for some different episodes. We're going to make Jess into a hologram, just so you guys know. For those of you guys that are fans of Jess. And she will be appearing in an episode as a hologram.
We'll show more of my experiments here. You know,
Yes.
What you guys see that makes it to the channel is the stuff that works. And I'm going to start showing you the stuff that didn't work out.
Yeah, and that'll all be appearing up on our Patreon page. So if you want to become a Patreon, that's one way to support us. And I know times are tough. Believe me, I know times are tough. If you can't support us on Patreon, or you can't use the super chat while we're doing a live stream, or buy some of our merch, that's okay. Just keep coming back, keep watching the videos. and keep liking, subscribing, commenting, because all that helps us in the end as well. So we're still going to continue to make content, whether we get a lot of people on Patreon or not. But, you know, it just helps if we have a little bit more in the kitty, so to speak. So Patreon and all that stuff is now turned on, so you can buy us a coffee. You can follow us on Patreon. You can follow us on Instagram. You can follow us, well, you can follow me on Instagram, I guess. It is the first layer.
I don't do the Instagram thing, and my Twitter account just retweets the live videos. Easy.
Yeah,
I am
that's
not
all mine does too.
Butterfly these days. I'm sorry, guys.
But we both have daytime jobs, and although my job is involved in the 3D printing industry, this is kind of secondary income to that. So I want to cover some more questions that we have real quick, because we've got a few and I want to get to them all.
I've got a good one here. I read Rasmus Wallen's questions. I'm going to summarize it.
Okay.
Basically, he has a system, and he's got the new Big Tree Tech Smart Filament Sensor, which I am waiting to play with. I don't have it yet. And so he's saying it gives faulty change of filament. I have another problem, direct drive BMG not getting enough filament because it will and then it won't, basically. So the two questions there. So the smart filament sensor, it is brand new from Big Tree Tech, and unfortunately I can't give it a thumbs up or thumbs down yet. I haven't had a chance to play with it yet. Now I can, for those of you who haven't seen this, it's a filament runout sensor that uses the equivalent of the laser in your mouse to look at the filament and determine if the filament is moving forward and backwards. So unlike a traditional filament runout sensor that's switch based and looks for a physical break, this one looks to see if it stopped moving. Now that has some cool benefits, but it's the technology's been out for a bit. And it's not perfect. Let's put it that way. It's not perfect. So it sounds like basically either you have a bad connection there, Rasmus, or your filament is so smooth or looking smooth enough that the module thinks the filament's not moving. So unfortunately, the only advice I can give in that scenario is to get in touch with Big Tree Tech and see, and most of the stuff is open source, so check if they have a GitHub page for the module. Have a look and see if anyone else has reported the issue and a fix yet. As I said, I haven't got a hold of one yet, so I can't give you any tips and tricks on it yet, but I hope to get a hold of one soon. Now, in regards to the other part here, with the direct drive BMG not getting enough filament, maybe if you can just provide a bit more info in the chat there, and Richard, I can better understand your question there. I do know, I'm going to say make sure you've entered your steps per millimeter properly, and make sure your wire connections are good there, because I think if it gears anything like, well, it's a Bondtech BMG, right? So that's 415 steps per millimeter.
Yeah.
It's quite a bit larger than the 93 default on the machine.
I'm going back a ways here because I missed a question by Brent Highfield. He's a newbie. He says, why do projects lift from the bed? I'm running a 2-day project and the sides are lifting. I've taped the sides down. Will it work? Should I stop the print? If your sides are lifting, there's a couple of things going on there. One, you're not close enough to the bed. Two, the material is shrinking too fast. So I would have to say you probably have your part cooling fan turned on too early in the print cycle. Or your bed is just not hot enough to keep it from curling. You should be if you're running PLA, your bed should be right around 50, 60 degrees. Your hot end should be anywhere between 200 and 210. I find that to be the most comfortable range. And try that, but I would stop the print if it's lifting. Don't use tape to hold it down because it's not going to repair your print. I start it again and see if, and what material are you using? That's another thing that I'd like to know.
Material.
Not everybody starts out with PLA. Some people actually start out with ABS, and if you're using ABS on an open air printer, that's another one of your issues. Carol says, how has your Wanhao Duplicator 6 been? Recommended still? Would I recommend the Duplicator 6 still? Yes, I would, because the Duplicator 6 now is different from what mine was when I bought it. The Duplicator 6 now is called the Duplicator 6 Plus. It comes with an all-metal hot end, auto bed leveling. There's a couple of other features that it comes with as well. I think it's a removable build plate as well. And it is a much better machine for the same money. Yes, I would still recommend a Duplicator 6.
Just hopping through that. Here's one. Okay, this is going to take a moment. By Kawasaki X14 Jomamato. There we go. I have another question. Would using a more flexible using more flexible wire for a heated bed? I have issues with wires breaking about every 6 months from wire bending back and forth from bed movement. So, from my opinion, the answer is yes with an asterisk. However, you're only mitigating a bigger issue. So, wire by default, any kind of copper wire. I think I've got a whole boatload of little heaters here. Wire by default, although it's flexible, even inside your strands, even with them, it's probably never going to focus on that, but they're tinned, but they're still strands. So there's a certain allowance of movement, and then past that, you're bending it. And anytime you bend any kind of metal, it's going to thin itself out over time on the inside. So that being said, you have to look at an ideal path to equalize the wear across the length of your wires. And for a lot of people, the answer is cable chains. And I'm in favor of them. I just haven't done any on my big printers because it takes up a lot of room. Now,
I haven't done any on my printers at all.
Yeah, and it's probably because you've routed your wires kind of nicely, right? Yeah. Generally, wire has a natural bend in it. Even this wire right here, it's got a natural kind of ring that it can naturally sit in. And the main thing you're going to want to do, and I'll just grab this again here, is if this guy is your bed, you're going to want to have it move along so that it bends equally at different points, and never so it gets tight like that or tight like that. Because when you get it tight, that's when it does the most wear. Now, I have gone and replaced my bed cables with silicone-coated wire. However, that's not going to work for things like thermocouples. And what they call RTDs, but are just basically your heat or your what are those things called? It's a long week.
Yeah.
Your resistive temperature measurements there.
There you go.
It's just transferring it to different points. So reduce the movement required for those wires and reduce the bending as much as you can. I do have a couple of printers that are still on their original wires 2 years later without issue. So it sounds like you got some bad angles in there. Just, with the printer off, just go and move your bed front to end and get an idea of where it will have the least amount of tension. Then just use a zip tie or something to keep part of it around the frame so that it reduces the amount of flex.
Okay, there's a couple more questions that are going by real fast tonight. Wow,
yeah, I'm trying to catch up here.
Yeah, me too. J.M. Moore says, any updates on setting up the BL Touch on the Cr-10 S on the newest version of Marlin 2.0? Don't use it. And I'm gonna explain why. I have tried it, and I tried it on a client's machine. Yes, it works. Yes, it does what it's supposed to do, but it's a lot of mucking about for nothing. I would just go to Creality's website, download their firmware for the Cr-10S with a BL Touch, and it's guaranteed to work. I just updated 9 Ender 3s today with BL Touches. That's what I spent my day doing, putting BL Touches on 9 Ender 3s. And I have to go back and finish them up tomorrow. I still have another couple to do, and then I've got a Cr-10 to work on, so for the same client. So, yes, I would say that you've got some things to work on. So,
I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to give a bit of a thumbs up to Mr. Ben Brady in the chat for bringing this up. Marlin 2.0 is really starting to pack in the memory for those 8-bit boards. So if you have a 10S or you have an Ender 3, I'm going to be honest with you guys. For the most part, there is no reason for you to go to Marlin 2.0 with an 8-bit board. Stick with Marlin 1.1.9. there has been no real additional new features that would make a noticeable difference on your 8-bit board. Now, if you have a 32-bit board, you definitely go Marlin 2.0, and there's changes. We had like 5 revs up or something, or 3 revs up, something like that, to Marlin, like solid releases in 1 week because too many things broke at once. So that was a nightmare for all of my machines. I can vouch 1.1.9 is a great firmware. It just may not have. Oh, I'm trying to think of a feature. I can't think of any Marlin 2.0 features that aren't available in 1.1.9 in some capacity. You got junction deviation, you got linear advance. It's all available there in 1.1.9. So stick with that version for now. The BL Touch integration is fine. And then only go to 2.0 once you have a 32-bit board that requires it.
There you go. There's a few other questions here, real quick. Ben, you're doing a lot of great things there. Thank you for covering our butts on the M92E415.
Yeah, good one.
Starting G code. Thank you very much. You answered that question. IsoCrafts Insulations says, hello guys. I print a lot of PP with my Artillery X1. The flat ribbon cable on the extruder hot end melts its isolation from the back of the pins to the front of the pins. So the pins disconnect. Why? Because there's too much current going through them.
Okay. Okay, so for those of you who own a Cr-10S, it's on the 10S Pro, isn't it, as well, that ribbon?
Yes.
Okay.
But it's a much heavier gauge wire than the Artillery is.
All right. The ribbon cable was the worst decision any of these companies could go with.
Yep.
Yes, it looks sleek, but here's what they've done, okay? Those conductors are only rated for a couple of watts tops each cable. So what they did was, in order to make sure that that enough power could go to the hot end, which on average is 30 to 40 watts, they started doubling things up. And if in the electrical world, sometimes they call this piggybacking, like piggybacking a breaker. So you put 2 15-amp breakers in to get a 30-amp feed equivalent. Now, the problem with that is if one 15-amp breaker breaks, basically it relies on the other one. And if you draw more than 15 watts, normally that breaks. Now, when we're talking wires, if you have 4 conductors, let's say, and 2 carry power and 2 carry return, and let's say one of those power leads breaks, and let's say each of those lines were rated for 20 watts. Well, now what's going to happen is the remaining power wire is going to have to deliver the full 40 watts to that block because the amount of power delivered is what the load is rated for. So now you got 40 watts, which is double the power rating of that wire going through there. And in the electrical world, power basically, if it can't flow high enough, it dissipates as heat. And that's when you get melted wires and all that. There's no thermal protection in the world that'll generally cover you for that because your wires will be melted already before your printer thermal runaways. So ribbons, terrible idea. Terrible idea. If you're having continuous issues with your ribbon, step 1, report it to the company because that is a design failure 100%.
That's a good way to start your house on fire.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we're not, the company we shall not name.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the sad truth is that your printer will keep on going. It'll keep on trying to deliver power until it says, hey, I'm delivering power and I'm not seeing any change. Report it to the company. Now, if you're not getting any traction with them, step 2, find if there's a way that you can run something without a ribbon cable. And I know that's a terrible answer. It does require lots of modification, but that's the way it is. Option number 3, if you're absolutely trapped, most towns now actually have some kind of electronic supplier that make custom cables. I would get in touch with them and say, hey, I would like to make this style of ribbon cable with a better gauge of wire. And that might alleviate it for you. But unfortunately, they've left you in a bad situation. This is why I don't like the 10S Pro, I don't like the Artillery, is because it locks you into a very proprietary system versus just running the wires yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Lachlan had an interesting question here, Captain Lachlan. He was asking, can you run TPU through basically a stock extruder? Yes and no.
Let me grab my TPU.
The reason I say yes and no is you do have to make a modification to your stock extruder in order to get the path a little bit tighter so that material will flow down the Bowden tube. But you also need to, I honestly, I would just go to an extruder that's meant for printing TPU and soft flexibles, like the Bondtech or any other dual geared machine or extruder. I think that's the best way to go. In all honesty, not everybody thinks the way that I do, but I really think that's the best way to go.
Yeah, I've got some TPU here, and I'm just going to show you guys how like flexible this stuff is. It's like, I don't know how to describe it. It's almost like balloons, like latex balloons that you buy. And
that's a good analogy.
And this is at a room temperature. Okay, this is not heated up at all. So, if you've got an extruder here and you've got this, and you're pushing back and forth, it requires almost no tension to bounce out of position. You can see that it'll twist up and it'll tie almost. It's super, super flexible. So if you have any gapping in your extruder assembly, and my buddy James will attest to this, it's happened many, many times to him, where there's just enough room, even in some of the metal extruders, for that filament to bow like that, and then it just continuously just pushes out of the machine. And you come with this big old ring. There's no jams or anything. You've just got a big old loop around your room. So I always recommend, reduce the amount of places that it can spring out of place for TPU. And if you can't do that, print very slow, retractions very slow. Don't give it the opportunity to bow, because you have to think of bowing like jackknifing a truck. If you take your time and go slowly, you're not going to jackknife it no matter how big it is. But if you start rushing things, it doesn't take a lot. It's not stiff at the joint.
All right, so we got time for a couple more questions, and I'm going to start with this first one here, which comes from Kawasaki 14. I'm not even going to say the last part of it. Which 32 board do y'all recommend? In all honesty, it all depends on your budget. If you've got the money, hands down, I would say Duet. It depends what you're putting it into as well. But as far as cost per performance, you can't beat the big tree boards, whether that be the 1.4. Don't bother with the 1.3. Just go right to the 1.4. I haven't played with the turbo yet.
It's just a higher clock rate.
Yeah, that's it. So
yeah,
there's the Pro board. There's also the Dip and the Mini. So they're a great economical board, and they perform well. So yeah, that's the way that I would go.
Yeah, I fully agree there. I've spoken about it almost every single video. The E3 Dip, I purely use that because it's a drop-in replacement on Creality systems. And I know I used to say just Ender 3, but it fits in every single Creality printer I put it in. Now, I've had a lot of issues with it from trying to play with new features, and it's not a result of Big Tree Tech. It's actually a result of the STM32 family. So the one printer that has not given me any grief whatsoever is the one running the SKR 1.3, which is now 1.4. I haven't really looked at the electrical changes. But the SKR board is the more superior board because the processor used is more widely supported within Marlin. So if you have the space and you're willing to print a custom enclosure before you install the board, because I've done that a few times, then get yourself the SKR board. You can't beat it for its price. Get yourself a set of TMC 2209s, and I've found recently the 2209 is much more capable than the 2208, but they don't tell you that. Get yourself a bunch of 2209s, make it silent, and you can do this sub $50 US these days. It's disgustingly cheap. Now, if you want to keep all your existing Creality enclosures and your screen and all that, then I would say the E3 Dip is a superior board. I know everyone likes the Mini 1.2 because the steppers come on board, but I like the flexibility to swap out steppers. So
yeah, me too.
So the E3 Dip, I've got one running downstairs with 2209s and a 5160 actually, which is a normally quite expensive chip. That's why I've been having all these different issues. I'm experimenting with too many technologies on a rather memory-limited board. It's one of the earlier ones, and we don't talk about it much now because when you buy the E3 dip now, it comes with double the memory, but the original one had quite a few limitations.
There you go. Amanda is going to be our last question for tonight. Amanda M., welcome to our live stream. You must be new here because I don't think I've seen your name in our chat before. She says, as a fellow Albertan, is filament humidity a big issue? I see a lot of people building dry boxes, and I feel like our climate doesn't need it. Well, here's a two-part answer to that. Depending on the filament, PLA is hydroscopic to a certain point. Nylon is very hydroscopic. ABS, not so much. PETG is a little bit. Now, a dry box, regardless of whatever climate you're in, is actually a good idea, or even just to store your filaments in. Now, the other thing that I want to say about that is, yes, I have a dry box. Actually, I have two of them in my office at Spool 3D. And the reason that I have them is because I'm always using different filaments all the time. And I do tend to leave them out because I'm lazy. I leave them out on the table, and then I'll come back and a big chunk will break off as I'm trying to feed it into the machine because I'm an idiot. And, of course, I left it out too long. So then you have to dry it. Now, again, I will say a dry box is a good idea because in certain times of year, winter not so much because it's very dry here in the winter, but the last couple of years in the summertime, it's been very, very humid. And as an Albertan, you can attest to that. It's been very humid, so that will affect the way that your plastics perform in your 3D printer. So the short answer, yes, a dry box is good for any climate.
Yes, absolutely. The only thing I would add there is it is very much seasonally. I was just checking to see. I don't think I actually had any temperature trending or humidity trending actually at my setup. But yeah, Alberta, it's dry in the winter. But I'll throw this back to you. Previous years, when it was dry in the winter, you'd walk around your house and literally shock yourself on every electrical outlet, every light switch, every piece of metal, because it was so dry that carpets build up huge amounts of static. I haven't encountered that this year, and I think it has been higher humidity than average. So that being said, I haven't had to dry my filament, but come this summer, in the summer, normally we're 40 to 50% humidity, even though it doesn't feel like it. So as Richard mentioned, any of the filaments that are very, very prone to humidity absorption, it'll happen. It just might happen at a slower rate. So do you need a dry box? Probably not. It's not an expensive thing to make, but if you want to do without it, just make sure you go through a proper drying procedure before running a roll of filament for a long print. See, and here's my second trick of the week. You don't need to dry out your filament if you burn through a reel every 3 days.
Yeah, yes, that's the other thing. And if you're interested in making a dry box, I made one out of some printed parts and an IKEA box. And
yeah,
we did that.
Video.
Yeah, that was a great video. And it's I would go check that one out. So that would be perfect for you because you can hold up to 5 rolls in that dry box of 1 kilogram rolls.
And that's the fancy. It's the fancy. You can print right out of it, right?
Yeah,
a dry box
exactly.
doesn't have to have holes in it. A dry box, you know, when I first started 3D printing, I bought a big sealable container. It didn't have a gasket or anything like that. And every time I bought a new roll of filament, it came with the desiccant pack. So I just kept throwing them in the bottom of the box. Mm-hmm. And that's fine for most people. And pretty much anywhere you go now, you're going to get a free bag of desiccant. So you don't even have to go out and buy them. There is something I'm playing with, and I will be back shortly with the results that is an alternative to your traditional desiccant pack. But it's been so dry, I haven't needed it. So
there you go. So I want to thank everybody that came into our chat tonight and was watching and hanging out with us during the live stream. You guys are amazing. It keeps bringing us back every Saturday. I know we have the odd Saturday where neither one of us can be here, but we do appreciate you guys coming and spending your time with us on a Saturday night when you could be out doing other bad things. I want to remind you that if you're interested in seeing any of these special projects that we got coming up, along with the Mando helmet that you guys saw last week, go over to Patreon, become a Patreon, show your support there, and you'll get to see all the behind-the-scenes stuff for that. Other than that, Brian, how was your week? Good? Bad? Indifferent?
Well, it's been busy. So for you guys who have seen me kind of sporadic last few months, I'm on a commissioning job right now. So I am basically doing 7 days on and then 7 days off, which equates to 3 days in the office and the rest of it running around. I am doing some moving. I'm doing a whole bunch of crazy stuff. So unfortunately, video content from me has been delayed. I'm trying to compensate that by applying more in the first layer on Facebook. So if you guys have any questions off hour or you want to bounce some ideas around, I'm usually monitoring that. So check out facebook.com/groups/
Here, I'm gonna bring it up right now.
We have a
There we
link.
go. There's the link.
There you go. Facebook.com/groups/the first layer. You can check us out at Instagram at Instagram.com/the-once-layer.
The once layer.
Once-layer, yeah.
And of course, you can always follow me on Twitter, which I don't really post a whole lot. I only post when we have new shows. Cleveland_IM, because that's me. I am the Cleveland. And of course, you guys know where to find us here on YouTube. And with that said, thank you guys all for joining us tonight. Next week, I hope to be drinking something a little different.
Me too, because I won't be here.
We might be drinking something a little different next week. So hopefully, if everything works out. And then we will see you guys on Wednesday with a brand new episode. And again, next Saturday night, right here on The First Layer. Until then, remember that The First Layer is your foundation to a great print. See you, Brian.
See you, Richard. Happy printing.
Happy printing. I got to use the right mouse.
Uh-oh.
Way to end it on a blooper, right?
Yeah, we're not mouse capable.
No.
See ya.
I have two mice on my desk.